54200 webinar regarding collecting hospice data for claims. The agenda for today's session will cover setup, entry of hospice medications, documenting infusion pumps associated with injectable medications, documenting a diagnosis associated with a medication, pharmacy fills and refills, and post-mortem services. The release notes for 54200 of Encore can be found on the Encore customer webpage. Let us now proceed to the setup information. The first thing we'll talk about is setting up supply in the supply table, the infusion pumps that you will need to document for your injectable medications. The type needs to be equal to S for supply and the usage equal to B for both. This is illustrated on the screen on slide 7. You'll also need to define in financial the standard unit charge for the pump, as well as HCPCS and revenue codes if the code will be the same for all payers. If the code will be differ from one payer to the other, the HCPCS and revenue codes would need to be defined in payer pricing. Slide 9 shows us where we would document the standard unit charge and the HCPCS and revenue codes in the supply and equipment table within Encore Financial. We need to make sure that the users that we want to have access to document prescription refills has the appropriate role assigned to them. 2 new roles have been added in 54200. The first is Hospice Prescription Manual Entry, which will allow the manual entry of prescription refills. This is particularly important if your pharmacy does not provide you with a file for import. But you may want to use this intermittently at times, even if you do get an import file. So the first role is Hospice Prescription Manual Entry. The second one is Hospice Prescription Invoice Import. This is for the import of the prescription fill and refill information that your pharmacy provider will give to you. Both of these roles provide access to a quick entry menu item in Encore Clinical. This is where you're importing the information on pharmacy fills and refills through Encore Clinical's quick entry menu. Things such as the medication, the HCPCS, cost information, etc., then flows to financial for billing on hospice claims. Slide 12 gives us an illustration of what those 2 entries look like in the quick entry menu. Another thing to point out, which may not be applicable, you may have already done this, is to be sure that any general inpatient facility that you provide services in for your hospice clients has an NPI defined. For example, in slide 14, we show an NPI populated in facility detail information and facility maintenance in Encore Clinical. We then have to go through a lot of billing setup to be able to support reporting post-mortem services on claims. In financial, we want to navigate to the billing window and then billing setup and available forms. Once again, this supports the requirement for post-mortem visits on the hospice claims. We have to set up to display a second modifier. So once again, billing setup, and available forms. You can see you'll have to identify the forms that are utilized for your hospice billing methods. For example, we are using a billing method that utilizes a UB04. If you have more than one hospice billing method, be sure to identify the form used for each of the applicable methods. You may need to repeat these steps for other forms. First, you want to highlight the form on the screen as illustrated with number 1, and then click the Update button as illustrated with number 2. This will open the Available Output Form Maintenance screen. When the update screen appears, be sure to take note of the map mode for the form. Be wise to jot this down and the form description. You want to jot down, for example, as illustrated on the screen, the map mode is English. Even if it is blank, note that it is blank. You'll need this information in a later step. Second, press the box detail button as illustrated with the number 2. This opens a form detail selection screen. Navigate through the list to find box 44, section 2, line 1, with a description of HCPCS modifier as illustrated with the number 1. If this does not exist, you will need to reference the 54160 release notes for instructions on how to add this and perform those actions prior to proceeding. Once you have located and highlighted box 44, section 2, line 1, press the update button as illustrated with the number 2. We are now looking at a little window above the yellow line in the screenshot. Once again, be sure to take note of the x-axis coordinate column value. Excuse me. Jot it down for reference in a future step. In the screen, you want to update the next box into 44, the section to 3, and the line to 1, as illustrated with the arrow number 2. Let us click Save and Close on the Form Detail Maintenance window illustrated above the yellow line. When that window closes, you can stay on the Form Detail section screen to perform your next step. For this section, you will need to know the map mode for the billing form being addressed and the x-axis coordinates. We will use these values to set up a new section in box 44. Now we're going to need to do a little bit of math, so we have to look at the x-axis coordinates for the new section. So based on the map mode of the form, we need to add a value to the x-axis coordinates, and we'll need to be cognizant of the width value. So you want to jot down the x-axis coordinate value from the previous box and add the appropriate value based upon the map mode. For example, we have had selected a map mode of English, so we need to add a value of 20 to the box 44 section 2 line 1 coordinate value, and we'll need to be cognizant of the width value being set to 20 when we establish the new box. So once again, a map mode is metric, English, or line-based, or it may have been blank, which is equal to line-based or the same value as a line-based map mode. So we want to click Add on the Form Detail Selection screen, as illustrated with the red arrow. This will launch a Form Detail Maintenance screen. In this screen, select the Details section from the Form Sections drop-down. Second, you want to enter box number 44, Section 3, Line 2. Select the HCPCS modifier 2 value from the description drop-down. And then on the x-axis coordinate, be sure to populate that with the value we defined just a few moments ago. The width will be equal to the value we just discussed a few moments ago. If you remember, our form's map mode was English, so our width is equal to 20. The number of characters should be set equal to 2, and the next box is equal to 45. The section is left blank, and line is set equal to 1. Save and clear, and then close the Form Detail Maintenance screen. This should return you to the form detail selection screen where you should see your Box 44, Section 3, Line 1 entry with the HCPCS modifier 2 description. Next, we're going to modify our hospice billing methods to add the Box 44, Section 3, Line 1, and to add 2 new load methods, one for load hospice facility and one that is load hospice medications. Box 44, Section 3, Line 1 will be used for postmortem visit reporting. Load hospice facility will include the NPI of general inpatient facility or general inpatient rows on the claim. And load hospice medications is used for reporting injectable and non-injectable hospice medication prescription fills on the claim. Next, we're going to modify our hospice billing method itself and add those items. So you want to navigate to Billing, Billing Setup, Billing Method, and choose your hospice billing method. If you have multiple hospice billing methods, you may need to repeat this step numerous times. Once you have your hospice billing method highlighted as indicated with the number 1 on the slide, click the Update button as illustrated with the number 2. Select the Box Def tab or the Box Definition tab and navigate to the Box 44, Section 3, Line 1 entry as illustrated on the screen and select the Add button. This opens an output form box definition screen. You will need to enter information on the Source tab. The arrow labeled number 1 is pointing to a source screen or source field where you need to select OpenAR from the drop-down. The data element field indicated by the arrow labeled number 2, you need to select the current service proc modifier 2 value from the drop-down. Lastly, you want to save and close and return to the billing method maintenance screen. Once you return to the billing method maintenance screen, navigate to the Claim Break tab and select Add. We're going to select the Load Hospice Facility method and the Load Hospice Medications method from the list as illustrated on the screen. When you select your Save and Clear, you may see a box as illustrated here to enter the appropriate numeric value. You can click OK and get past this without entering any information. Excuse me. You can also enter the date 04/01/2014, but you do not have to do this. Click OK on the screen, and it will return you to your billing method maintenance screen where you should see your load hospice medications and load hospice facility. Save and close, and we're finished. There's no further setup needed. One note about postmortem services that I wanted to point out. There is no need for new service types to be added. It's not a necessity. Services on the date of death, after the time of death, through 12 midnight on the date of death are reported as postmortem services without any additional intervention. Next, we're going to talk about documenting your hospice medication information in Encore Clinical. A few things were changed on the entering of a hospice medication. First is you can now identify whether a med is covered under the hospice benefit whenever you're entering a med. When a med is an injectable, you'll be able to document that an infusion pump is used, yes or no, and enter that pump if you are using a pump. You have the option to identify if the prescription was ordered when the new medication was added as well. When we look at the screen, we can see the covered by hospice benefit, which is a yes/no field. Once again, you'll still be able to do this through the hospice button on the med list as you did previously, but we wanted to provide the option here in the med add screen as well. You can also see there's an infusion pump used for injectable meds. If a med is an injectable, the infusion pump used field, which you see is a pink colored field indicating that it is required, will display. This is a yes or no drop down and must be answered. What is an injectable med? Anything that has a route that starts with intra, I-N-T-R-A, as well as injection, epidural, perfusion, subcutaneous, subdermal, and transurethral, and irrigation are available to be identified as an injectable med. In addition, a prescription ordered field is now down near the start date of the medication. This is a yes/no drop-down, and you do not have to do this, but if your agency elects to record when prescriptions are actually ordered, you can do this at the time of the adding of a new med to indicate that the initial fill was actually ordered. If you answer yes to the infusion pump used question, you will see an additional pump button that appears, as well as a box that's display only right next to it on the right-hand side. When you click the pump button, it opens a copy of the equipment that have been defined for the patient's episode of admission. So any equipment that's already documented in your RefClin form relative to this episode of admission will be showing here. If your infusion pump is already present in the equipment for the episode, you can select it by populating the checkbox as is highlighted on the form and merely commit the pop-up. If your infusion pump is not already on the list, you can add it by clicking on the Add button and selecting the pump from the supply and equipment list, and then populate the checkbox as highlighted on the screenshot and commit the form. When you return to the medication, the Create Medication screen, you can see that the description of the equipment we identified as an infusion pump is now showing to the right of the pump button. You can change this as the circumstances change over the course of the admission, including removing a pump altogether by changing the infusion pump used, yes/no, from a yes to a no. You will also notice that there is an associated diagnosis field on the screen that allows you to identify which active diagnosis for the episode the drug is related to. I did want to point out that your clinical diagnosis screen will actually have a message that says that the med list is open and equipment is not available right now if you try to open the RefClin or clinical diagnosis screen while you have the medication list open. Otherwise, you'll see the equipment grid as you always did if the med list is not open in the same activity. As I had previously mentioned, you still have the Hospice button on your screen where you can document hospice meds. The features related to this button have not changed. There is an Order Refill button as well. Within the Order Refill, you can document who ordered a prescription, fill or refill, for a particular hospice med and when. As I had mentioned previously, you do not have to record this information, but it is available. Now, for manual entry of prescription fill and refill information, if your pharmacy is not providing you with a file to import, you will need to enter the information manually. You'll select the patient episode information and enter details regarding the prescription. Remember, we now have to report all hospice meds on the hospice claims every time the med prescription is refilled. When I select the manual entry option from the quick entry menu, the screen appears as indicated. I select the patient episode, and you can see it has the patient's name, their medical record number, and their start of care date. And then I select from the hospice medications. It then populates underneath the patient episode drug name column. And additionally, you have to enter the prescription number, NDC code, the quantity, dose, units, date that the prescription was dispensed, the cost, a yes/no to indicate whether or not this is a compound, the associated revenue code, which will be required for claims, and a HCPCS code that is required for any injectable medications. Once you enter one and hit save, you can now then select another, whether it's for the same patient and just a different med, or if you're going on to another patient that you received an invoice for from your pharmacy provider. To import a prescription refill file, you want to go to your quick entry menu and select your hospice prescription invoice import. You'll navigate to the location of the file, import the file, and I wanted to point out that the import looks for patient and episode matches as well as matches on the hospice med. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. The layout of the pharmacy import file contains the fields, data types as are illustrated on slide 48. We also tell you whether or not the field is required for the import and give you some notes describing what the field is intended to illustrate. All of the files must be in a CSV format. The hospice prescription invoice import screen looks as illustrated in slide 49. You want to click on the Browse button to navigate to where you have your file saved. And then once the file name is populated in the Import File Location field, select the Import Selected File button. If the file imported does not match the layout in slide 48, you will see headings for the columns from the import file as illustrated on the screen. You'll need to scroll through the columns and make sure that the fields shown on slide 48 are mapped to a column in the file. This mapping is done utilizing a drop-down as illustrated here on slide 51. For anything that was already populated, double-check the mapping, and once you have completed this mapping, press the Import Selected File button again. You'll also notice that there is a Resolve Import Exceptions display. This shows you if there were any exceptions on the import, as well as the number of exceptions in the parentheses on the button. To resolve the import exceptions, you'll see a list of the exceptions that indicates the patient episode, drug name, prescription information, and the date dispensed. The reasons for the exception are as follows. no matching patient found. This means that either the first name and the last name were populated in the import file, but there is no patient, no hospice patient found with the same first name or last name. If the first name and last name are populated and more than one patient matches this, and there is no MRN associated in the file to look for, it will also show no matching patient found because it does not know which patient to attach it to. If there is a middle initial with the first name and the last name and all three do not match, it will report as no matching patient found. If more than one hospice episode with the same start of care date exists, it will report that. If there's more than one active hospice episode and we did not have a specific start of care date in the file for that record, it will report that there was more than one active hospice episode found. If we did have, if there was only one and we did not have a specific start of care date, it will match it to that one hospice episode that is active. If there are no hospice episodes, it will report no hospice episodes found. If there's more than one active drug name, for example, if we had more than one prednisone entry in the med list, it would report as more than one active whatever drug name found, match found, and you would have to map that out. If the drug name was not found in the med list as a hospice covered med, it would put it out as an exception as well. So for example, if we had a morphine in the drug list but we had never identified it as being covered by hospice, it would put it out as an exception. You can resolve the exceptions by selecting the patient episode and the medication and merely saying resolve the exception. When we look back at the patient medication list, we then see that there's a refill history button. Under the refill history button, this will show you all of the refills for any of the hospice medications as illustrated on slide 54. It'll show for all medications by default, or once again in the drop-down you can select a particular hospice med to look at the prescription history for it. And these are the actual refills that we receive either through the file import or through the manual entry of the prescription refill information. Let's talk for a moment about postmortem services. Once again, postmortem services are identified as services on the date of death, after the time of death, through 12 midnight on the date of death. And this information must be carried over and included on hospice claims. To support this, you can identify that a patient died during a visit and record both the date of death and the time of death. This will carry through to the episode as well, the date and time of death. Additional documentation surrounding death has also been incorporated, as you can see on the screen. I do know that this is available in the hospice nursing and hospice social work forms by default. So this information regarding the date of death and the time of death will carry over to financial, and any services that were documented or have a service end time or a service start and or end time after the time of death on the date of death would be calculated as postmortem services. So for example, I was doing a nursing visit that started at 9 p.m. and the patient died at 10, but I was there until 10:45. The time of my visit from 10 to 10:45 would be considered a postmortem service. This concludes our webinar regarding 54200 and collecting hospice data for claims. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions about the topics covered, your Delta customer support representative will be able to help you. Once again, thank you and have a great day.